What's up, guys? It's Zach with Upstairs Studio. Back at it again, finally, after 2 months on sabbatical, chasing the world, chasing my spirit, finding everything that there is to find out, and processing all that information, bringing it to you. No, really, there's just been a lot of side projects happening, a lot of changes in life in general, stuff going on with work, and like I said, side projects and things like that. So. But know that I have been thinking about the channel and that I do think about it pretty frequently. And I spent some time thinking about a lot of thinking, what I can do to improve and what I can do to bring more value to you guys and to explain things differently and to just dive into stuff differently. So I've spent some time thinking of some big changes with a lot of small parts that will hopefully be beneficial to you guys and to walk you through some, whether it's nomenclature or products or plugins or just things in the studio and how that stuff works, and just explain it, boil it down to very basic levels. I think that's going to be really helpful for people because there's a lot of stuff that it might sound scarier than it is, or it might sound more complicated than it is, or maybe it sounds super simple and maybe it's something that there's a little more depth to it. There's a lot of things that are easy to misconstrue in studio stuff. So I'm going to start a series on just doing exactly that, boiling stuff down and explaining it very simply and helping people to understand that and bring it into terms that make sense and not just in a way where you feel like you have to go to college to learn this stuff, because you don't have to anymore. You really don't. And so that's what I'm here to do. So our first topic is going to be EQ. What does EQ stand for? Is it economic quality? Maybe, based off of this graph right now, as far as 2021 is concerned. But anyway, EQ stands for equalization. And a lot of people look at it as just, where do I go to turn the bass up? How can I turn the bass up on this in their car, right? And there's a lot more to it than that. It has way more value than just turning the bass up. And we're going to go over some of that in this video today. And we're going to talk about, how we can use EQ to help out our mixes, because I've heard some mixes that don't really seem to have any EQ on them, and it's just not favorable. It's not as good as it could be. So with that being said, we're going to jump in to Reaper. We're going to pull up a session, have a couple tracks that we're going to mess around with, and we'll just see what we can get out of it. Okay, so going over EQ. Here we have our drum track, and we have another little tasty riff that I came up with a little bit earlier. And I'm going to demonstrate some equalization here, and talk about some ways to strategically equalize or EQ your music or your tracks or whatever it is that you're going to be doing in here. This drum kit that I'm going to be using here is pretty freaking awesome. If you're looking for a budget-oriented drum kit, I cannot recommend this enough. It's phenomenal. It is such a good kit. This is how it sounds just out of the box. I've done nothing to it. This has 0 plugins on it. That sounds so good considering that this is the creators of this software. I think it's Manda Audio. They are doing it based off of donations. So if you are in a spot where you're not able to spend the money on it, that's okay, because they still allow you to pick it up for free. You just have to have a donation screen pop up whenever you use it. But it's really a pretty awesome software. It has tons of grooves. This is not a sponsored video, but dude, if you're looking for something, Manda Audio, check it out. I'll put a link in the description. It is so good. I cannot recommend it enough. And then same thing with this other one. I like to use free plugins because they're free. And this one is by Fluff. I think I've talked about it before on the channel. It's also so good. I'll try to find a link for that as well. Please check that out. It's super good. I mean, this is what it sounds like out of the box. And the fact that that's free is just amazing. It blows my mind. So anyway, getting back to the EQ stuff. Sorry, got a little distracted there. Going to EQ. So this is, again, the little multi-band that I was talking about before. So a lot of times in our cars, we see it with a little dial, and it's kind of like superfluous little pictures that go up or down, or being able to change it by so many decibels. And a lot of people like to do this with their music, and I just don't understand why you don't just turn the volume up. This just sounds bad. Like, it's the same thing as just turning up the volume. Also, I don't think I turned that on. That's what it does. And that just like destroyed my ears. It auto muted. I've never had that happen before. I didn't even know that could happen. So that's what happens when you just crank up the everything highs, mids, lows on your car's audio. That's what happens. Just turn the volume up. So this is something that so like I was talking about before, when you're trying to be strategic with your music and with your tracks to make your mix sound good, like right now, this doesn't sound awful. But there's some things that we could do to make that sound a little bit better. So if we pop open our equalizer here for the drums, like maybe, and again, it would be better to have individual tracks for the individual drums, right? Or at least groups of them that coincide well with each other, like overheads. That's generally going to be for your cymbals. And you would want to EQ things different. Obviously, if you were doing cymbals, you wouldn't want it to just be like this, because then you're getting a lot of, if it was a cymbal, you wouldn't be picking up the right thing or the right frequencies. It would sound very dark and weird and just not natural. And in this situation, now the bass drum is way overpowering everything else. So if we bring that down, still some pretty good thump to it, but it's also articulated well. It's not so overpowering. And maybe I think that those highs are too much. So I can bring this down here, and in this specific equalizer, that is a low pass filter. It's confusing because for whatever reason, it's just kind of hard to think about high pass, low pass. But essentially, if it's a high pass filter, it's letting the high frequencies pass through. If it's a low pass filter, it's letting the low frequencies pass through. That will, it's gonna kind of round off the top end a little bit, so it's not as harsh. Hear that? Whereas if we do the opposite, then obviously there's a lot of that sizzle, a lot of that high end in there. So that sounds okay. And with this, we might even be able to just bring the volume down a little bit because the guitar is a little loud. So this also kind of goes into dialing in your amplifier, which we'll use this Amped Roots as an example of that. So I'll just kind of tweak it a little bit as we're listening. And again, this kind of goes with what type of music you're trying to play and what sound you want. So there's no right or wrong way to, well, there kind of is, but with creative license, there's whatever sounds right for the music, So I'm just going to tweak this a little bit while we're listening. So obviously I'm changing some other stuff too, like gain and presence and things like that. But for the most part, if we just want to focus on the changes that I'm doing with the equalizer, it's similar to what we're doing here with this 3-band EQ. It's just not as dynamic in terms of what it's able to cover because it has low, mid, high. It's not those hertz responses. So that's sort of the difference, but it's a similar process and it's the same idea as dialing in your amplifier. that, you hear a little more of that high-end crunch. If we turn everything that's in the low register and the mid register off, then it becomes a very thin sound. Sometimes, this can have, merit. You obviously don't want to be so weak. You probably want to boost some of that a little bit, but that's essentially what we're doing, is we're changing and we're morphing what sounds and frequencies are being allowed to come through the amp. So that's how you can kind of think about it when you're trying to dial in your amplifier to have the right sound, because there's some bands that they have a lot more highs and mids in their amp sounds, and there's other ones that are really chuggy and heavy, and there's also some other stuff that goes into that. It's not as simple as this, but they probably have more low and mids in their guitar mixes or in their guitar amps. So that's kind of a fast and dirty explanation of equalization, EQ, and some examples of that. I hope that this was helpful. And also we even got a little bit of a bonus of messing around with the amp settings. And I hope that you're able to hear some of the differences there. Please check out these plugins. They're awesome. They're cheap or free, which is great for you and for just everybody. It's amazing that these people were willing to create such a solid product for nothing. And again, as always, guys, my name is Zach with Upstairs Studio. I hope that you found this helpful. Please check out the description below. I'm going to also include a free gift from me to you. It's going to be my beginner's guide for audio engineering, things like that. And it's going to help explain some of this stuff in a little greater detail, also just in a written format. So go ahead, check that out. I hope it was helpful. I'll see you guys in the next one.